The music floated softly through the hall as guests adjusted their ties and dresses, whispering about the elegant decorations and the bride's stunning lace gown. Sandra stood near the edge of the dance floor, bouquet trembling slightly in her hand, her smile bright enough for photographs but not strong enough to steady the storm inside her. She had just married a good man, a kind, safe choice everyone in her family approved of. Yet as she looked around the room, her eyes kept drifting to the one person who had tried the hardest not to look at her, Keanu. He stood near the back, in a simple black suit that somehow made him look more out of place than anyone else. He wasn't family. He wasn't from the groom's side. He was the old friend who had slipped back into her life a few months ago, just long enough to remind her who she used to be, and then stepped aside when she announced the wedding date. He had promised himself he would only come to support her, to clap at the right times, to disappear quietly afterward. But every time she laughed too loudly, every time she avoided his eyes, a small voice inside him whispered that something about all of this was wrong. The first dance began, and Sandra stepped into her husband's arms. The crowd sighed, phones lifted, faces soft with admiration. To everyone else, it looked like a fairy tale, the white dress, the chandeliers, the roses lining the walls. Yet from where Keanu stood, he could see the tiny crack in her composure. The way her hand rested on the groom's shoulder but her fingers never fully relaxed. The way her eyes flickered past the cameras for half a second, searching, almost apologizing. He remembered the night years ago when she had told him, "If I ever look like I'm smiling but my eyes are asking for help, please don't walk away." He had laughed then, not realizing that those words would one day feel like a sacred promise. As the song played on, memories crashed over him. The time she had called him at 2 a.m. after a brutal breakup, her voice raw but still making jokes. The way she always defended people who couldn't speak for themselves. The quiet courage she showed every time life tried to break her. That same courage was missing from her face now. Instead, he saw something that terrified him: resignation. It wasn't that the groom was cruel or unworthy. It was that Sandra had slowly convinced herself she did not deserve the kind of love she once dreamed of, the kind that saw all of her, even the broken pieces, and stayed. The music shifted, inviting more couples onto the floor. Laughter rose, glasses clinked, and people began to relax, thinking the most emotional part of the evening was over. But for Sandra, the real battle was just beginning. As she moved through the steps, she felt the weight of every decision that had brought her to this moment. She had chosen stability over passion, safety over uncertainty. She had chosen what everyone said was right for her. And yet there in the crowd stood the one man who had always loved her quietly, without demands, without drama, simply by showing up when no one else did. Her husband spun her gently, and for a brief second she faced the back of the hall. Her gaze collided with Keanu's. Time didn't slow down in a cinematic cliché. It did something worse. It became painfully clear. In his eyes, she saw everything she had been running from, the question she refused to ask herself, the life she might have lived, the version of Sandra who still believed in following her heart, no matter how many times it had been broken. Her throat tightened, her vision blurred, and for the first time that night, the practiced smile slipped. Keanu's chest burned with a mixture of guilt and helpless anger, at himself, at the timing, at the universe that seemed to enjoy cruel jokes. He remembered the message he had drafted the night before the wedding and never sent. "If there is even one part of you that isn't sure, say it now. I'll stand with you through the mess." He had deleted it, telling himself it was selfish, that real love was letting her be happy, even if it wasn't with him. But watching her now, he wondered if kindness had turned into cowardice, if his humility had become an excuse to stay silent while she walked into a life that didn't quite fit. The song ended to a round of applause. Guests wiped away sentimental tears, convinced they had just witnessed the beginning of a beautiful forever. Sandra and her husband bowed their heads together, smiling for the cameras. Then, as the DJ prepared the next track, the groom leaned in, whispering something in her ear that made her laugh, and stepped away to hug a friend. For a fleeting moment, Sandra stood alone in the center of the dance floor, framed by flowers, lights, and every expectation she had ever tried to fulfill. Her breathing quickened, palms damp against the bouquet. She could feel the pressure of 100 eyes, and yet the room suddenly felt strangely empty, as if everyone and everything around her had faded into a soft blur. In that thin, fragile silence between songs, she did something she hadn't planned and didn't fully understand. She turned her head, searching the crowd again, this time not by accident, but with intention. Her gaze found Keanu's, steady and unguarded, and she didn't look away. A single thought cut through the noise in her mind, sharp and terrifying. If I don't say something now, I might never be truly honest again. And as the next song began to swell, with the entire hall expecting the playful, easy transition into celebration, Sandra took a slow, deliberate step toward the one man she was supposed to pretend she didn't still love. Sandra's heels pressed into the polished floor as she stepped forward, each click of her shoes disappearing beneath the rising music. No one noticed at first. Guests were busy checking their phones, adjusting their dresses, making jokes about catching the bouquet. But to her, the distance between the center of the dance floor and the far edge of the room felt like crossing a tightrope over an endless drop. Halfway there, doubt slammed into her chest. What am I doing? I'm married. This is insane. She almost turned back, almost. But then she saw Keanu's hands, clenched nervously at his sides, as if he were physically holding himself in place, afraid that if he moved an inch, he'd betray everything he'd promised himself. He hadn't expected her to walk toward him. He had spent the whole day rehearsing invisibility, smile politely, stay out of the pictures, leave before the last song. Now, as she approached, his heart pounded so hard he felt slightly dizzy. He tried to look calm to hide the storm inside, but his eyes betrayed him. They softened, then darkened with worry. The closer she came, the more he saw it. The tiny tremor in her lip, the way her shoulders lifted as if she were holding back tears by pure force of will. This wasn't a bride glowing with uncomplicated joy. This was Sandra, the Sandra he knew, standing in a beautiful dress and quietly falling apart. She stopped a few steps away from him, close enough to smell the faint citrus of his cologne, the same one he'd worn on the day they first met. For a split second, neither of them spoke. The hall kept moving around them in slow motion, waiters crossing with trays, a child chasing a bubble, the groom laughing loudly across the room, unaware. It felt like they were inside a glass bubble that only they could hear, every sound muffled except for their ragged breaths. "You came," Sandra whispered, her voice thin, as if she were afraid that if she spoke too loudly, the entire room would shatter around them. "I told you I would," Keanu replied quietly, eyes never leaving hers. "I just didn't think you'd walk straight into the line of fire." Her laugh came out as a painful half-sob. "This whole day is the line of fire." He swallowed hard. "Are you okay?" It was such a simple question, and yet it landed like a stone in her chest. No one else had asked it that way, not her bridesmaids, not her family, not even her husband. They had all asked if she was excited, happy, ready, but only Keanu asked if she was okay. The kindness in it, the gentle honesty, nearly broke whatever fragile composure she had left. "I don't know," she admitted, eyes glistening. "I don't know if I'm okay. I don't even know who I am in this dress." He glanced around, noticing a few curious faces starting to turn their way. The music was upbeat now, inviting guests to the dance floor, and the DJ's voice echoed through the speakers, hyping the crowd. It bought them a little privacy. Everyone was more focused on themselves than on the bride taking a moment with an old friend. Still, Keanu felt the weight of every second. This wasn't a casual conversation. They were standing on holy ground made of unspoken feelings and impossible choices. "Sandra," he said softly, his voice trembling despite his efforts to stay calm. "If this is just nerves, if you're just overwhelmed, that's okay. Big days do that. I don't want to." She cut him off, shaking her head. "It's not just nerves. I know what nerves feel like. This is something else." She looked past him for a moment, her gaze unfocused, like she was seeing a version of herself only she could recognize. The girl who used to dream of traveling light, of not belonging to anyone's expectations, not even her own. Somewhere along the way, she had traded those dreams for a script. Stable job, polite husband, tasteful wedding. Nothing wrong, nothing terrible, just safe. And safe had slowly begun to feel like a gilded cage. "You once told me," she said, her voice gaining a fragile strength, "that the bravest thing you ever did was walk away from the life everyone expected you to live." He remembered the career he'd abandoned, the comfortable path he had burned down because it didn't feel like his. "And I still don't know if it was bravery or stupidity," he replied with a faint, self-conscious smile. It was both, she said, and it was honest. She drew in a shaky breath. I didn't invite you to this wedding just to prove I had moved on, Keanu. I think, I think I wanted you here as some kind of moral compass. I knew that if something felt truly wrong, I'd see it in your face. His throat closed up. And what do you see now? I see you trying not to show me how much this hurts you, she murmured. I see you being humble and kind, putting my happiness first even when it crushes you. And I see that I am about to spend my life telling myself that your pain was just bad timing. The words hit him like a sudden gust of cold wind. He had prepared himself to watch her happy with someone else. He had told himself that love meant letting her go. But hearing her acknowledge his pain out loud stripped away the last defense he had. He had never wanted to be the source of her confusion, never wanted to be the shadow standing in the doorway of her future. Sandra, listen, he said, voice hoarse. I will support any decision you make. If you tell me you love him and you want this, I will walk out those doors and disappear from your life if that's what helps you. But if there is a part of you that feels trapped, if there is a voice in you that's screaming, don't silence it just because you're afraid to disappoint people. That's not you. You don't owe the world a performance of happiness. Tears finally spilled over, streaking down her carefully done makeup. You know what the worst part is, she whispered. When I walked down that aisle, I kept thinking, if I trip, if something goes wrong, someone will stop me, someone will catch me. And then I realized that someone I was thinking of wasn't the man waiting for me at the altar. His eyes burned. He wanted to tell her everything he'd kept buried for years, that he loved her, that he'd loved her through every heartbreak, that he'd loved her in the silence between their messages and in the spaces between their almost confessions. But he also knew that saying it now, here, would shatter her world in a way that might never be repaired. Love without courage was useless. Love without humility was selfish. He had spent so long trying to be her safe place that the idea of becoming the reason her life exploded made him feel sick. Before he could respond, a cheerful voice cut through the air. There you are! Sandra's maid of honor appeared beside them, linking her arm through Sandra's. The groom is looking for you. They're about to start the speeches. Come on, everyone's waiting. Sandra hastily wiped her tears, forcing a quick laugh. I'm okay, just overwhelmed, she said, hiding behind the easiest excuse available. The maid of honor glanced between the two of them, sensing something but choosing not to dig. Well, you look stunning. Breathe, okay? It's your night. She started to pull Sandra back toward the front of the hall. Sandra hesitated, her hand slipping from Keanu's for a heartbeat longer than it should have. Their fingers brushed, a small touch loaded with more history than words could capture. His eyes silently asked, Are you sure? Hers silently answered, I don't know. As she was led away, she glanced over her shoulder one last time, locking eyes with him. In that moment, he saw something change, just a flicker but unmistakable. The resigned bride was gone. In her place was the Sandra who used to argue with teachers when they were unfair, who once stood alone in a protest because she believed in something. A spark of defiance, a hint of courage. The DJ's voice boomed again, calling everyone's attention to the head table for the speeches. Guests began to move to their seats, laughter echoing, chairs scraping across the floor. The bubble around Keanu popped, and he suddenly felt the full weight of the room again, pressing in on him from every direction. He watched as Sandra took her seat beside her husband, her face arranged in a polite, camera-ready smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. The father of the bride rose with a trembling hand, unfolding his speech. People lifted their glasses, ready to toast a love story they believed was complete. Keanu remained standing at the back, torn between walking out the door and staying to witness whatever came next. He knew one thing for certain. Whatever decision Sandra made tonight would define the rest of her life, and possibly his. As the first line of the speech echoed through the hall, all eyes turned toward the happy couple. Except Keanu's. His eyes were fixed only on Sandra, waiting for even the smallest sign that she was about to do something no one in that room would ever forget. The father of the bride cleared his throat, his voice warm and proud as it flowed through the speakers. From the day Sandra was born, he began, I knew she was different. She was fearless, stubborn, the kind of little girl who never backed down from what she believed in. Laughter rippled gently around the room. Cameras pointed at the head table. Sandra smiled on cue, but inside every word landed like a quiet accusation. Fearless, stubborn, never backed down. When had those things stopped being true about her? At what point had she started editing herself to be easier to love, easier to accept, easier to place neatly into a picture-perfect life? Her father continued, I always told her, me Nina, don't ever settle for less than the love you deserve. And seeing her here today with such a good man by her side, he turned to the groom, raising his glass. I know she made the right choice. The room burst into applause. The groom squeezed Sandra's hand under the table, beaming. She squeezed back automatically because that's what a good wife would do. But the words, right choice, reverberated in her skull, clashing sharply with the truth pressing up against her ribs like a trapped bird. Out of the corner of her eye, she saw Keanu at the back of the hall, still standing. Not leaving, not disappearing, just there, like he had always been. Quiet, steady, and painfully honest without saying a word. Her father wasn't done. When Sandra told me she was getting married, I was scared, he admitted, his voice softening. Not because I doubted him, but because I worried she might be doing what so many of us do, choosing what is comfortable instead of what is true. But then I saw the way she smiled, and I believed she was happy. The lie of her smile burned on her face like a mask she suddenly couldn't stand wearing. Her father looked right at her, his eyes brimming. So, Mija, if you are happy, then my heart is at peace, because you always had the courage to follow your own path. You were never afraid to say what you really felt. The words lodged in her throat like glass, never afraid to say what you really felt. She felt the room closing in, the white flowers, the glittering chandelier, the polished silverware catching the light. Everything was beautiful, everything was perfect, everything was wrong. Her breath started to hitch. Her fingers tightened around the stem of her glass. The groom leaned closer, whispering, "You okay?" This time, the answer that rose inside her was not a polite lie. It was a silent, desperate, blazing no. Something in her snapped, not in a reckless way, but in a deeply honest one. She realized that if she stayed silent now, she would be teaching herself a cruel lesson, that her life belonged more to other people's expectations than to her own heart. And that was a truth she knew she would not survive quietly. Her father lowered his notes to Sandra and, "Dad," she blurted, her voice cutting through the hall before she even fully decided to speak. The microphone caught her single word, amplifying it. The room froze, glasses paused midair. A laugh died halfway out of someone's mouth. Her father blinked, surprised. "Yes, Prince." Every eye turned to Sandra. Her heart slammed against her ribs. This was the moment she'd always thought she would handle gracefully, responsibly, maturely. Instead, she felt like a little girl again, standing in front of a classroom, terrified and stubborn all at once. I'm sorry," she began, standing up slowly. Her chair scraped the floor, the sound sharp in the sudden silence. Her husband looked up at her, confused, concern furrowing his brow. Sandra's hands trembled as she reached for the microphone from her father. He hesitated, but something in her expression, fragile yet determined, made him let go. Dozens of faces stared at her. Family, friends, coworkers, strangers. People who had bought dresses, plane tickets, gifts. People who believed they knew her. People who thought they were watching the happy ending of a love story, not the beginning of a storm. Her voice shook, but she forced herself to meet their eyes. "Thank you, all of you, for being here," she said, her words uneven but honest. "I know how much effort and love went into this day. I know how much everyone has done to make this beautiful, and it is beautiful, it really is." Murmurs of encouragement drifted through the room. A few people clapped softly, assuming she was just overwhelmed and emotional, like any bride might be. She swallowed hard. "But I need to be honest, with you, with my family, with my husband, and with myself." A ripple of unease swept across the room. The groom stiffened beside her, his jaw tightening just slightly. "Sandra," he said under his breath, barely audible through the mic. "What are you doing?" She looked down at him, and her heart broke for the kindness in his eyes, for the way he had tried, for the way he didn't deserve humiliation. "I'm so sorry," she whispered, meant only for him. "You deserve someone who is all the way in, and I thought I was. I wanted to be, but I'm not." Someone in the crowd gasped. A cousin's hand flew to her mouth. A bridesmaid exchanged a horrified look with another. I have spent months telling myself that this was right because it was good and safe and respectable, Sandra said, her voice gaining strength with each word. But the truth is I've been scared. Scared of being alone, scared of choosing wrong, scared of breaking hearts, especially yours. She glanced at her husband, eyes shimmering. You are a good man. This is not about you not being enough. It's about me not being honest. He looked shattered, but he held himself with painful dignity, nodding slightly as if giving her silent permission to keep going, even though each syllable was carving lines into his face. I have always told people to be brave, to follow what's real, not what just looks right from the outside, she continued. But somewhere along the way, I stopped doing that for myself. I started performing a version of me that fit inside everyone else's idea of happiness, and I can't do it anymore, not on the first day of the rest of my life. The room was utterly still. No one breathed, no one moved. Even the chandeliers seemed to listen. Keanu stood at the back, hands shaking, watching the woman he loved do the hardest thing he had ever seen her do. He had wanted to save her, to step in, to pull her out. But she was saving herself in front of everyone with a courage that humbled him to his core. Sandra forced herself to say the words that had haunted her all day. I can't stay married just because I'm afraid to disappoint you all. I can't build a life on a lie, even if it's a beautiful, polite lie. I am so deeply sorry. Her husband stood slowly, his eyes glistening. The microphone picked up the crack in his voice. Are you saying you don't love me? The question sliced into the room like a blade. I care about you, Sandra said softly, tears spilling freely now. I respect you. I wanted to love you the way you deserve, but my heart, she faltered, terrified to say the rest. He followed her gaze over the crowd and saw where it landed. Keanu. Something like comprehension and pain flashed across his face. He closed his eyes for a moment, breathing through the blow. When he opened them again, there was no rage there, only a deep, tired sadness. I always knew there was someone else in your story, he whispered, just loud enough for her and the first few rows to hear. I just thought time had erased him. Sandra shook her head, choking back a sob. Time tried, I tried, but he didn't ask to be here. He just never stopped being kind, never stopped showing up. Whispers spread through the hall like fire. Some faces were shocked, some disapproving, some quietly moved. Her mother covered her mouth, tears streaming. Her father stared at her, stunned, then slowly nodded, a mixture of pain and pride in his eyes. He had raised a girl who did not lie about her heart, and now he was watching the cost of that truth. The groom stepped back from the table, his shoulders straight. Then this isn't our wedding, he said, voice trembling but controlled. It's your crossroads, and I won't hold you in a life you're not sure about. He gently removed the ring from his finger, setting it on the tablecloth between them. The sight of it nearly undid her. I'm so sorry, she repeated, her words breaking. He forced a small, sad smile. You're doing the bravest thing I've ever seen anyone do, he said. That's something I loved about you. I just wish. He didn't finish. He didn't have to. He turned toward the crowd, lifting his chin with quiet dignity. I think we need a moment, he said to the guests. For her, for all of us. Sandra held the microphone with shaking hands. Her chest felt hollow, raw, exposed. But beneath the grief and the humiliation, something else simmered, an unexpected sense of relief. For the first time in months, she wasn't pretending. She set the microphone down slowly. The noise of the room rose, confused and scattered, chairs scraping, whispers overlapping, someone crying softly. Her world had just detonated in front of everyone she knew. Then, in the chaos, a familiar presence appeared beside her. Keanu. He hadn't rushed her. He hadn't made a grand gesture. He simply walked forward, steady and quiet, as if this were the most natural place in the world for him to be, at her side when everything fell apart. He didn't touch her at first. He just looked into her eyes, asking a question without words. Are you sure? Is this truly what you want? She nodded, her face crumpling into a mixture of terror and truth. I don't know what comes next, she whispered, barely audible under the murmurs around them. I just know I couldn't keep walking in the wrong direction. Something inside him broke and healed at the same time. Then we'll figure out next one step at a time, he said softly. Even if it's messy, even if it's hard, I'm not here to be your rescue. I'm here to be your witness. Her breath shook. Why are you always so kind to me? She asked, almost accusingly, like it hurt. Because you deserve someone who doesn't flinch when you tell the truth, he answered. And because I love you, I always have. But today, loving you means standing here, even if half this room hates me for it. Before she could respond, a sharp, disapproving voice cut through the air. An ant, face tight with anger, hissed, "This is shameful, a humiliation in front of everyone. How could you do this, Sandra?" The words sliced deep, and for a second, Sandra's shoulders hunched, an old reflex of shrinking under judgment. Keanu stepped half a pace closer, not to shield her from blame, but to stand with her in it. Sandra inhaled shakily. Then, to her own surprise, she straightened. "I know it looks shameful," she said, her voice wobbling but clear. "But staying in a marriage built on a lie, that would be the real shame. I'm not proud of hurting him. I'll be apologizing for that for a long time, but I won't apologize for choosing truth, not anymore." Her aunt opened her mouth to argue, but her father rose from his chair, placing a hand on Sandra's shoulder. "That's enough," he said quietly, but with a weight that silenced the room. He looked at his daughter, his eyes glistening. "You broke my heart tonight, Mija, but you did it with the same courage I taught you. I can't be angry at you for being exactly who I raised you to be." She collapsed against him, sobbing into his chest. He held her tightly, his hand trembling at the back of her head. Over her shoulder, he met Keanu's eyes. There was no warmth there yet, no welcome, but there also wasn't hatred. Only a weary recognition. This man hadn't stolen his daughter. He had simply refused to disappear from the story her heart had already written. After several long moments, her father gently let her go. "You need air," he said softly. "Go." The hall was buzzing now with low, stunned conversation, but a thin path seemed to open between the tables, as if the room itself understood that something sacred and painful was happening. Sandra stepped down from the head table, her dress brushing the floor, her world in pieces around her. She hesitated, glancing at Keanu. "Walk with me?" she asked, her voice raw. "Always," he replied. They moved together through the parted crowd, not running, not hiding, just walking, slow and deliberate under 100 stunned eyes. Some looked at them with judgment, some with shock, some with a strange, quiet admiration. People were witnessing the cost of living honestly, and it made them uncomfortable. It also made some of them silently, secretly hopeful. When they reached the edge of the hall, near the tall open doors that led out to the dimly lit garden, Sandra stopped. She turned back one last time, taking in the room, the flowers, the candles, the abandoned glasses, the man she had just broken who sat at the head table staring down at his hands, shoulders shaking. Pain lanced through her. "I'll spend a long time making amends for that," she whispered. "You're not walking away from your responsibility," Keanu said gently. "You're walking toward your truth. There's a difference. You can be kind and still be honest. You can be humble and still be brave." She nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks in quiet streams. "I just hope one day he finds someone who chooses him without hesitating." "I believe he will," Keanu said. "Because today he showed something rare too, the courage to let go instead of clinging to what isn't real. He deserves a love that is sure." They stepped outside into the cool night air. The muffled sounds of the hall faded behind them, replaced by the soft rustle of leaves and the distant hum of city life. The sky stretched above, dark and vast, indifferent to human drama, yet somehow comforting in its enormity. For a long moment, they said nothing. Sandra leaned against a stone pillar, closing her eyes, the weight of what she had done settling over her like a heavy cloak. She had disappointed people. She had broken a man's heart. She had shattered the script everyone had written for her. And yet, beneath the guilt, there was a small, fierce, unfamiliar feeling beginning to flicker. "Freedom. I don't want you to think I did this for you," she said quietly, opening her eyes to look at Keanu. "I didn't blow up my wedding to fall into your arms like some movie scene. I did it because I couldn't keep lying to myself. Even if you weren't here, I think, eventually, I would have broken." He nodded, relief and respect mingling in his gaze. "I know," he replied. "If this was about me, it would be wrong. This was about you finally listening to your own voice. I'm honored I got to be here when you did." She studied his face, the familiar lines, the tired eyes that still held so much kindness. "Do you ever regret walking away from the life everyone expected of you?" she asked. "Every once in a while," he admitted. "On the hard days, on the lonely nights. But then I remember how it felt to wake up every morning in a life that wasn't mine. And I'd rather face uncertainty with my eyes open than live a stable lie with them closed." She exhaled slowly. "That's what today feels like, terrifying and honest." He smiled softly. "Honest is a good place to start." They stood there in silence, the gravity of the night hanging between them. This wasn't a fairy tale ending. There were no cheers, no perfect kiss as the credits rolled. There was pain to mend, conversations to have, reputations to weather, therapy to seek. Their story, if it was to exist at all, would be built not on stolen moments and dramatic rescues, but on long, difficult, humbling work. "Whatever happens from here," Sandra said, her voice steadier now, "I want to choose it with my whole heart. No more halfway decisions, no more living for appearances. If I fall in love, I want it to be with my eyes wide open." Keanu's answer was simple, almost a whisper. "Then let's both promise that, to ourselves. Even if one day our paths go different ways, we don't go back to sleepwalking through our lives." She extended her hand, a quiet, almost childlike gesture. "Deal." He took it, his grip warm and firm. "Deal." For a brief moment, standing under the dark sky with the broken wedding still glowing behind them, they were just two flawed, fragile people choosing courage over comfort. Not heroes, not villains, just humans trying to be honest in a world that often prefers the pretty lie. As they began to walk down the garden path, away from the hall and everything it represented, Sandra glanced sideways at him. "You know," she said softly, a faint smile tugging at her lips through the tears, "one day when I'm ready, I'd like to learn how to dance again. Not the kind you practice for months to impress everyone. The real kind, where you can stumble and laugh and still not let go." He looked at her eyes shining. "When that day comes," he replied, "I'll be there, not to lead you, just to hold on when you stumble." And so they walked into the uncertain night, carrying guilt, carrying grief, but also carrying a new, fragile, precious thing between them. The courage to be true, no matter who was watching. Inside, people would talk, judge, argue. The story of the wedding where the bride walked away would travel through families and friend groups for years. Some would call it selfish. Some would quietly call it brave. But only two people would ever fully understand what it had cost. The bride who finally told the truth, and the man who pulled her close, not to claim her, not to save her, but to stand beside her in the moment that left everyone speechless and her finally fully free.